From the Mountaintops, Building Community Enterprise. This is a podcast where we explore the building blocks of economic and community development. Today, I have joining me Dr. Clint Arnold, faculty member at West Virginia State University and a recently minted doctor, Dr. Clint Arnold, here at Marshall University. We're going to explore the elements of Black businesses in West Virginia specifically and Greater Appalachia in general. Clint, welcome. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to start off. Let me start off with a more general question. So you have been a Black entrepreneur in West Virginia personally. So this is a journey for you. Why don't you talk very briefly about what you've done in the past and where that kind of led into the research that you just completed?
I actually spent the first 25 years of my professional life in corporate America. I retired from Verizon as a director in 2013, running business units in sales, marketing, product development, product management, actually a general manager where I actually had the complete P&L responsibility for a federal government business unit that was worth about $150 million a year in revenue. And I retired from there in 2013. I then bought a business here in West Virginia. I retired early after 25 years, bought a franchise here in Charleston, South Charleston, and I ran that for 6 years. In the process of running that business, I used some of my retirement, purchased the business, basically cash flowed it myself. And one of the experiences that I had, I actually call it, when I'm talking to my wife and certain people, it was the best of times and the worst of times because of the experiences. I had enough cash to run the business myself because I didn't want partners. But when I tried to go to literally all of the traditional banks in the Charleston area, I was unable to get funding for just a line of credit, a couple of small loans. So over the course of 6 years, I fixed all of the problems, doubled the size of the business. So it was doing about $500,000 a year in revenue when I bought it. When I sold it in May of 2020, we were doing just under $1 million a year. We were profitable. And I did make some mistakes along the way from a cash flow perspective. That's one of the key learnings that I had, that I wish if I could do it all over again. And when I became an adjunct professor 6 years ago at West Virginia State, and then decided that I really enjoyed being an entrepreneur, I decided to sell that business because I didn't have a passion for it. I bought it for financial reasons and was going to buy multiple franchises, but that didn't work out. So I started working on my doctorate. And one of the first questions is, what's your dissertation topic going to be? And I knew mine from the time I walked in the door: the success factors of minority businesses and why there's such a discrepancy between minority success and non-minority success, and why there was such a large disparity. I didn't know what I was going to find, other than from my own personal experiences, there were some issues that I could not answer and could not explain. So that's how I got to where I am. And I'm a CEO of a nonprofit here in Charleston called KISRA. And we help people transitioning out of incarceration, recovery, domestic violence situations, and we have an affordable housing division. So I'm still in the corporate world running a business as an entrepreneur, but I'm also a professor that does research and teaches, advises the youth in our region as well. So that's the purpose of the research and how I started digging into the why behind the what. And now I'm to the point that I want to figure out the how to fix it.
Yeah, I wanted you to share that story because I think it's critical to see that you have someone who has the corporate experience, has the background, has the financial wherewithal, and you still see these differences. One of the things I've noted, if you look at, the earning potential, let's just say West Virginia, when you look at the number of African Americans of working age, and you look at how many of those are contributing to full capacity and this difference in revenue generation, turns out there's almost $2 or $3 billion worth of unattained revenue into the state that we don't get because we're not developing those businesses. So I think your story is very important because it sets a good groundwork. Looking at your research, one of the things you see is that difference in earning. If I remember correctly, Black businesses on the average are 18 or 20% less earning than their equivalents. And some of that is driven by what their expectation on success. Can you speak to that a bit? Because that was some real interesting results that came out of your research.
So actually, we are minority-owned businesses are 53% less
Okay.
than non-white businesses across the country. And they only generate 10% of the revenue. There's about 16 to 17 trillion dollars that's generated across the country for all businesses. We make up about a third of the businesses total, but we're only bringing in 10% of the $16 trillion in revenue, 1.6 trillion, but we're 30% of the businesses, and minorities are 41% of the total population as of the 2023 census. So we're 41% of the population, 30% of all minority businesses in the country, but we're only bringing in a sliver of the total revenue. There's a lot of reasons for that. It's access to cash, access to capital. The types of industries that we're in have a lower average revenue per business. The state that we're in, the resources available, whether it's opportunity zones or CDFI funds, or just support in general for minority businesses, there were disparities that I found in the research as I actually researched the 13 state area from New York all the way down to Mississippi. So I had a pretty good swath of different states that we covered, some big, some small. And yeah, it was actually quite significant. 53% less revenue, 46% fewer employees, average revenue half, 10% of the total. It's like every metric, every key indicator that you look at, there was a disparity. And if you look at the reasons why, it's access to capital, the reasons for success, what they deem as successful. And when I say they, the minority businesses, it's not just a financial outcome that they're looking for. There were reasons like legacy. I had to because there were no other opportunities out there. I wanted to create opportunities for my community. I wanted to improve my community. So there were 6 or 7 that stood out. Now, financial success was obviously one of them, but the others were almost equally yoked as far as what was important. What I found was that we need to change some things in our financial world where we go and get access to capital. The model that's used in order to approve loans, to approve line of credits, needs to be adjusted from a policy perspective. And of course, with everything that's going on across the country from a DEI affirmative action perspective, ripping everything away, that was put in place to give the minority businesses and the minority population access, not handouts, access, is now going to be a little bit more difficult. But I actually have ideas that we can still use in order to achieve the goals that was intended to help with, without totally losing all of the headway that was made over the past 40 or 50 years.
Yeah, I was first exposed to this idea that we have different expectations. There was a book, can't remember right offhand, a Native American who was part of the philanthropic community, and he was noticing that the metrics they use for assessing quality of a grant or proposal were based on non-culturally based outcomes. For example, the one that I liked and I spent a lot of time trying to understand was looking at the Asian American population on the West Coast. And they look at, for example, multi-generational households as a way of launching business and success in their communities, whereas that's considered a negative when you start looking at some of these other outcomes. So what you end up with is a system, as you said, that uses some of those positive attributes that are more culturally based and using them as negatives as they evaluate. You know, that really helps you understand what those changes should be. You and I have talked about the new Letton Arnold approach to developing focus. Why don't you talk about some of those elements you saw that are necessary for, you think, changing how we go about developing businesses?
A couple of things. Based on the definition of success, the resources that they need are going to vary. And so it's not a one size fits all for each one of the businesses. And that was actually that's part of the policy and the financial institution recommendations that I put forth in the discussion part of my dissertation, is to make sure that we are taking into account what they need, why they need it, and even from a financial perspective, it might not take as much as you would think if someone is just trying to get a return on earnings, that they're able to buy an island in the Caribbean when they retire, but that's not the intent for a lot of the businesses. I'm not saying that's not the intent of some, but so if we adjust some of those things and make some of the tools that are available more expansive, not just in certain areas in certain states like opportunity zones. The access to opportunity zones was actually, I want to say this, biased towards not the populations that it was intended to help in a lot of the regions. So if you had wealth, if you understood the process, if you knew where to go, who to ask, how the system worked, they would get access to opportunity zones. And in a lot of cases, they were non-minority businesses that were taking advantage of it. CDFI funds are out there, but it's actually expanded a lot over the years. But there are CDFI funds out there. The SBA has programs. And so a lot of what I saw that came out of the research is that a lot of the businesses that weren't as successful didn't know, didn't understand, weren't informed, weren't educated. And when I mean educated, I don't mean bachelor's degree, master's degree, doctorate. I meant educated from a mentoring perspective. How do you do what needs to be done practically to enable your success? Do I need to partner with certain people in order to become more successful? And just a lot of that is missing, because if you think about a lot of the reasons why minority businesses go into business, sometimes it's out of desperation. I'm just doing it. I have some money in the bank, and they don't even know and understand in a lot of cases that I don't have enough funding to get past the first 6 months. Everything is wonderful for 6 months. And then when I grow, I don't have the cash to grow, because your profit margins are less because of the industry that you're in. You don't have the supplemental funding or the line of credit to balance your own cash with the bank's cash. And then understand how cash flow works, because I actually teach my students this, that you can be profitable and broke. And when I first say that, a lot of people are like, how can you be profitable and broke? You can be generating a lot of cash, but if you have to wait from a timing perspective, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, especially if you're dealing with governments, you have to fund all of the activity, the inventory, the payroll, the salary, the taxes for 6 weeks before you get your first penny. And if you don't understand, I just sold all of this, but I have no money in the bank. That's because you've burned it all up, paying for everything. And then when you go back to the bank and say, hey, I'm selling at a faster rate than I thought I would, the bank looks at you under traditional metrics and say, your ratios are out of whack, your credit score has dropped, and you're too high of a risk. Therefore, good luck. You then go to the secondary market, pay 20, 30% interest rates, have to pay it back in 6-9 months. Your cash flow is destroyed. You have a little bit of cash, but you can't sustain that for a very extended period of time. So you start going down this black hole that you can't get out of and can't figure out, where do I go from here? Therefore, the failure rate for a lot of minority businesses is much higher than non-minority businesses. And it's actually a logical explanation. But what do you do about it is what you and I have talked about. Like, how do we turn the tide a little bit to gain parity?
One of the things that I thought was striking in some of your work, this idea of having a network as part of your learning community. And that's part of that education piece I know you were speaking to. It's not just the degrees, but what does that network need to look like? And unfortunately, we tend as a community to isolate ourselves and do it on our own. You want to talk a little bit about what are those networks and how should they look?
Yeah, so the networks are going to vary by person, by business, by whatever it is that you're trying to do. So the network can be a blend of financial supporters. It could be experts in certain fields. And if you're not good at something, and this is where some self-assessment comes into play from an education and training perspective, which I teach this in the entrepreneurial classes I teach in my spare time. I actually tell them, you need to identify what you're good at, what you're not good at. If you're good at talking to people, but you're not good at numbers, you must get a bookkeeper, somebody that understands the finances, how to manage that, how to package things up. And you may want to partner with a non-minority business partner to help get your foot in the doors to places that you may not be able to walk in because they don't know you. So I'm not from this area. And I knew a lot of people. One of the smartest things that I could have done with some of the network that I had, besides the egotistical part of me that says, I don't want partners that I can do this by myself, was to partner with some of the people that had the wherewithal, the reputation, the bank accounts, and just say, I don't need all of your help. I just need somebody to walk in with me and vouch for me to this bank that on paper, I should check all of the boxes and say, you can have whatever you want, so that they do what I need them to do from a financial perspective. So it's a combination of functional expertise, financial wherewithal, knowledge of how money works. People like you and I, that also have the education, and heaven forbid, the education and the experience, both in the private sector and in the academic sector, that can actually mentor people and tell them the good, the bad, and the ugly, not to scare them off, but just to make sure that they understand what are the risks that are involved, what are the pros, what are the cons, and make sure you think through all of these things so that when you get 3, 4, 3, 6, 9, 12 months in, you're not sitting there going, what just happened? And then it's too late. It's too late to react because you're out of cash.
Yeah,
so those are some of the things.
Yeah, one of the things when I was in the venture back business world, one of the things that I always heard, which didn't resonate at first, to your point, Clint, where you always talk about, I don't want partners, I want to take 100% ownership. They used to always tell you in the venture world, you can have 100% of nothing, or you can have 50 or 60% of something. And that something could be much larger. And that mentality was something I had to change, because when venture investors come in, they take a big chunk of the business. But the truth is, that's that network that makes your worth much higher than what you think it is. And so your potential is much higher. And so you can raise money when you have those kind of partners. You got people who can advise you, they're sitting on your board. So yeah, they have a big chunk of the business. But again, I'd rather have a chunk of a big piece of business than 100% of nothing.
Right. So you can almost look at, if you think about some of the stories on Shark Tank, if you watch that, a lot of the successful ventures that have come out of that, and I know all of them aren't successful, are the ones where the sharks partner with someone, and one of their selling points are, I want 25, 30%. However, I have access to every Walmart, every Home Depot, every Walmart around the country. So therefore, your volume is going to be off the charts. And I have the funds in order to help you grow so that you can actually sustain this over an extended period of time. And that's the mentality that we probably need to proliferate throughout the minority community, is that find those people. They're out there. Everybody isn't isolationists that want to do everything on their own and tax you to death and take all your money. But there are some that will partner with you, because I've actually dealt with a lot of people that will help you along the way. But you got to know what to ask, how to package, make sure that you're knowledgeable and understand what you're doing, because their risk is at stake just like yours is, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So there are ways to do it. I think it's just information, spread the information, spread the knowledge, spread the wealth, and understand what is a good risk, what's a bad risk, and then change our policymakers, the financial institutions, make some adjustments. But I think now that I have some empirical data, I won't just have to go sit and do a Senate hearing and just say, I think this is a good idea. With the research that I have now, from our perspective, from the minority business owner's perspective, which was one of the differences in what the research that I did, and the outcomes that are statistically validated, 3 of the 4 hypotheses that I came up with are actually statistically significant. I can now say I have empirical data that says this is the approach that we need to take. Therefore, the policies that you're implementing are actually going to be counterproductive, not just to the minority community, but to your own community as well. Because if one group suffers, we all suffer.
That's a good closing summary there, Clint. I want to thank you for spending this time with us. And for those of you who are listening, April 28th, I want to remind you, Building Black Businesses in West Virginia conference in Shepherdstown. I want to encourage you to come visit. We will be having a keynote presentation on Clint's research and some of my research on the overarching state of Black business in West Virginia and Appalachia. So again, we invite you. There'll be a QR code at the end of this presentation for you to scan. Registration is free, so we hope to see you there. So again, Clint, thank you. This was a great conversation. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for inviting me.